Question time. What's your favorite AK mag style? The more curved 7.62 style or the straighter 5.45 style? And have you ever run both calibers in the same game? If you did, were you called out by some AK purist who thinks they know more than you? Let us know in the comments section below. Let's go! What's up, Airsofters? This is the all-new Dytac Sharpest Bros SLR Rifleworks AK series of AEGs. In my opinion, SLR Rifleworks makes some of the coolest looking firearms parts and accessories on the planet, seamlessly blending the futuristic design philosophy with well thought out ergonomic performance enhancements on popular platforms like the AR and AK, as well as Glock families. And now, SLR is licensing some of their awesomely cool futuristic designs for use in the airsoft industry. Combine that with an amazing receiver design by Sharpest Bros, and you've got a match made in futuristic AK heaven. If you're anything like me, one of the drawbacks to using the AK platform has always been a lack of modern styling and accessory attachment points. Thankfully, these new AKs have the potential to silence the haters, like me. This modern AK M4 hybrid is actually pretty cool and definitely something I can get behind. It's worth noting that if you're looking for a more traditional AK layout, a standard receiver with an SLR folding stock is also available at Evike.com. But this video is all about these babies. This AK comes in 3 different lengths: the Shorty Mc Short Stack, the Middle McGee, and of course the Long Boy, denoted of course by their barrel and handguard length. All have different lengths of handguard that go all the way out to the muzzle. And in my opinion, this gives these AKs a really unique profile. These AKs beautifully combine the Sharpest Bros designed AK receiver with the integrated M4 buffer, I might add, none of that bolt-on BS going on back here, with the awesome SLR Rifleworks M-Lock handguard. These puppies definitely have the looks of a top performer. But do they have the juice to match? We'll find out soon enough out on the range. But first, a look at how they arrive in the box and what's inside these puppies. Let's take a look at how this comes in the box. As you can see, it's a pretty nondescript cardboard box, save for the labels on either end, denoting both the length of the model and the model number or model style, this being the Crink or the Short Boy version. Removing the lid, we get a view of the high quality foam that protects the top of the rifle. Just inside, you also have some cut foam that outlines the rifle, keeping it nice and secure for shipping, as well as the high capacity magazine. Note that this does not come with a battery, but this is a perfect opportunity to upgrade yourself with an excellent battery from Titan Power. We found that in all of our tests, the 11.1 volt 2600 milliamp worked flawlessly in all 3 lengths and fits beautifully in the traditional battery cover area, which you'll see in just a minute. One other note: small type Tamiya. These are pre-wired from the factory with small type Tamiya, so if you're buying this without intending to modify it, make sure you're getting a small type Tamiya connector.
The internals on these Dytac AKs are fairly standard: 16:1 gears on 8mm bearings, a polymer piston with just a single metal tooth, polymer cylinder head, and a nozzle with no O-ring. While there isn't anything groundbreaking going on internally, it all works together well and is easily upgraded with a wide variety of aftermarket parts available. The only oddball thing we noticed was the spring guide, which has this bar that locks it in place and needs to be taken out before the spring guide can be removed.
I'm sure you noticed by now that the receiver on these AKs looks quite a bit different from your stock standard AK. In addition to having an integrated buffer tube that does not need to be attached separately. The billet styling is achieved through a casting process for the aluminum. In fact, it is a cast aluminum receiver, which is finished really nicely. You can't really find any mold lines or seam lines on it. I particularly like that. Further up the front, we've got even more aluminum in the construction, featuring a skeletonized M-LOK compatible front handguard, of course, in the 3 different lengths that are available. I particularly like this because that lightning keeps the weight down while still maintaining its structural rigidity and its ability to mount a huge amount of accessories. Just above that, you'll also notice that something that's a common upgrade for a lot of AK users has been done for you right out of the box, and that's an SLR gas tube pick rail, giving you plenty of room to mount an optic like we've done here with this Avengers T1, which really for Airsoft is all you need. The nice thing about this lower third optic mount as well is that you can still use your included AK leaf sight in the rear and adjustable front sight. Speaking of pick rail space, you'll notice that there is not a pick rail on top of the dust cover, standard for an AK, but unlike some other AKs, there isn't a slide mount on this side of the AK, meaning that you can't use clamp style or Russian optic mounts. Unfortunately, that means if you did want to mount an optic a little bit further back, you're going to have to source your own dust cover that has a pick rail integrated into it, or come up with some super jank pipe clamp or tape situation. Very in theme for Eastern Bloc upgrades, I think, but just be aware of its inability to mount any optic that has any moderate eye relief. But who cares? The red dot is really all you need in Airsoft, right? Finishing out the front for our accessories we've attached, I've got an M-LOK compatible Strike Industries Link. This is the SI Link. I particularly like them. They're reversible, they're M-LOK compatible. And up front, we've got 14mm negative threads that will accept something like this EMG Noveski integrated tracer and amplifier, although you could throw on anything you like, especially if you're trying to be in theme. You could always go with an amplifier that's like AK styled. Out back, we've got that integrated buffer tube that I was talking about, the mount for which is not pinned or attached loosely. It's molded into the body shell, which makes it a lot more rigid and robust. And of course, the Dytac included stock. This one can be swapped out for anything. I will say one thing that I found kind of disappointing, and maybe that's just because I'm used to M4s, is while you've got the space to do a rear wired setup, they've still decided to go with the top wired or dust covered wired form of the AK. Speaking of battery placement, I wanted to show you that you can fit a full-size 2600 milliamp 11.1 Titan power battery in here, as well as many other AK style stick packs. I just particularly like the fact that you can get this chunkin' big boy in the top here, which is unusual for an AK. One thing I am slightly disappointed in is the fact that it's still wired to Tamiyas. Not a huge deal. You can always pay your local technician or do it yourself and switch these over to something like a Dean's connector, which is going to give you lower resistance and a little bit better performance out of your battery. Finally, let's talk about QD. No, not you guys, QD points. On either side of the receiver, there's one QD point, as well as having one on either side of the stock, which of course, if you swap the stock off, you might want to look for something that has QD points, but I find the ones on the receiver are far more useful. If you are a fan of 2 points like I am, you've got plenty of rail space up front to add on your own QD point up here, so you could always rock a 2 point. However, there is one on either side of the handguard at the very front. You know, one of the things I first noticed when shooting this is how easy to operate the controls are. There are a wide range of tightnesses of the selector arm on the AK, depending on what brand you go with. And I particularly like that on this version, the single hand operation is actually single hand operation. And that's because it's tight enough so that you don't get a whole lot of play, but loose enough that you can operate the select fire switch with one hand, as it was intended. I particularly like this feature on AKs, and I wish I saw more of them with it. Albeit it's not necessarily historically accurate for every AK platform, but on a futuristic one like this, I think it's right at home and makes it a lot easier to use. I will say though, coming from an M4, using an AK select fire switch takes a little getting used to. Instead of semi being the first one from safe, semi's all the way down here. And then back up to safe, which, if in a pinch, kind of makes sense. Like if you have to snap fire someone, you aren't necessarily going to want to pick and choose whether you're shooting semi or full auto, because 7.62 is expensive, right? One other note about the select fire switch. Despite its comfortability, I will say that a pretty standard feature on these select fire arms is this little notch, and you might be wondering what those are for. Well, in a real AK, that's a bolt hold open, meaning that you could move your selector arm down, roll your bolt all the way back, and then roll this up to lock your bolt in place. Unfortunately, that feature is not retained here on this version, which is unfortunate, because that would have been cool. In addition to being a really comfortable rifle, the sights make it easy to get on target. But I will say, especially on a platform like this, a red dot is really, really useful. Speaking of the other ergonomics, I particularly like that the adjustable stock allows you to fine-tune the fit of the rifle right in the throat of your elbow, and really giving you a nice compact, if you want it, or extended grip, which for big guys and small guys is going to make this platform a lot more attractive. Of course, the different rail lengths are going to kind of limit what kind of accessories you can put on the rail itself. For example, the shortest one couldn't take something like this Strike Industries link just because it doesn't have enough length to it. Man, that's easy to feather. And when you need to change magazines, it's a pretty standard affair here for an AK mag change. Simply sweep the paddle with your thumb, use an extra magazine to flip that out. Whatever cool guy reloading move you like to do with AKs can be accomplished here due to the standard mag release button. And it's easy to put magazines back in. The included magazines are a high cap and have very little play and side wobble to them. And of course, this is compatible with drum and box mags for the AK from brands like Angel Custom. Now, before we get into our accuracy portion, let's talk a little bit about hop-up adjustment. The hop-up, standard to an AK, is underneath the dust cover or imitation bolt. And it's a standard sliding affair. This one allows you to set it with a pretty long throw, and they've given you a tab on there to allow you to adjust it even when you're wearing gloves. Amazing. We're out here at the 50-foot line, and I've brought all three models of the SLR AK out to show you the difference in performance between all three. Got three targets set up down there. We're going to move left to right, starting with our shortest option. Here's where I'll point out that if you're not comfortable or used to AK sights, you might find getting a sight picture strange on an AK, and I'm still very unfamiliar with how this platform works. So it took me a couple shots to really walk myself in and get dialed in, but we'll see that when we move on to the other rifles. We moved up to our mid-length now. We're going to go for the middle target. It's also important to note that for all three of these, I'm using 0.25 gram BBs in our high-capacity magazine. And having not cleaned the barrel, all I've done is a quick hop-up adjustment to make sure that my trajectory is flat. There's not a whole lot of wind today, thankfully, so we're getting a pretty accurate picture of the accuracy of these rifles. Let's see how it does. Having that red dot on there allows me to drill the target in the A zone from the get-go. If you don't have a red dot, you gotta get yourself one. Let's switch out to the longer one. We've swapped over to our full-length version, the longest long boy in the group. Again, using 0.25s, haven't cleaned the barrel. Basically set the hop up so that it's shooting flat with 2.5s. Let's see how it does. Now that I've become more familiar with the leaf sight, it becomes a lot easier to get the A zone on these targets. Now, given that this one has a much longer barrel length, I'd be willing to bet it's a little bit more accurate at 100 feet. Let's take all three back and see how we did. But before we do that, we should probably go see how I did at 50 feet. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for catching me. All right, let's go look. As you can see, the combination of the shorter barrel length and my unfamiliarity with the sighting system meant that my first couple shots were pretty high and wide. But once I saw where my shots were going, it was real easy to have follow-up shots all within close to the A zone. So under practical circumstances where you're going to be using this the most often, that's really good accuracy without even cleaning the barrel. Let's see how our mid-length did over here. You can see what a huge improvement the red dot gave me in terms of my accuracy. Now, all three of these were extremely consistent in their shots, meaning that my follow-up shots were right in the same range as my initial shots, but the addition of the red dot meant that I was able to zero in on that A zone right from the get-go, meaning most of my shots were in the center of mass on my target, which at 50 feet is great. I can't wait to see how that performs on a 100-foot test. Let's head over to our long-range one and see how we did. Thankfully, I was a lot more familiar with the AK sights by the time I got to this full-length railed version. The nice thing about this full-length handguard is that the pointability is increased. As you get the front of the rifle further away from your body, you can make smaller adjustments to get better accuracy at distance, and that shows on the cardboard target at 50 feet. I was able to almost snapshot all of my shots in the A zone, and at 50 feet, that's awesome performance, and as you can see, really consistent. Let's head out to the 100-foot mark and see how much that accuracy varies 50 feet further. Now that we've moved out to 100 feet, I'm again made nervous by the fact that I have no optic. Maybe some of you are shooters with superpowers that can zoom with your eyeballs and see exactly where you're shooting. Or maybe you have some high-def vision that allows you to see white plastic BBs flying through the air on a sunny day. But I don't have those powers. So I hope I hit the target. Without any optic, I'm curious to see how large my spread will be if I have to walk the shots in. Let's see how it does. First things first, I noticed that it's still pretty consistent even out at 100 feet, having not cleaned the inner barrel. Obviously, if you clean it, you can bring that grouping in a little bit to give yourself a little bit better accuracy at distance. But I do appreciate that that longer barrel, again, gives you more control when it comes to shooting things farther away. So since we're on target with all of those, I wonder how the shorter versions will fare. Let's try them. I gotta say, with the available accessory mounting space, the length of the handguard being as comfortable as it is, and the adjustable position stock, I think the mid-length is probably my favorite of the group. I don't feel like I need that longer barrel length for the majority of the engagements I'm in personally. And the shorter version, as you'll see, really doesn't have a whole lot of accessory mounting space. With that said, let's see how we do at our 100-foot test. You know, something like a red dot, as I've said so many times so far in this video, I didn't have to think. All I did was pull the gun up, put the red dot on the target, and my first shot, without even thinking, was on the target. They're really nice to have and almost invaluable in Airsoft. And now, we're testing the shortest SLR AK in the group. Again, like I said, the single M-lock section at the front really kind of limits the accessories that you'd put on this. Maybe a flashlight and a red dot on the pick rail up top. But it does give you a lot more maneuverability in close quarters combat, which you might find yourself using this style more often. I am excited to see how it performs at the 100-foot test though. Let's see. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it could be something like cleaning the inner barrel could solve. But on this particular model at 100 feet, I'm noticing a much wider spread of my BBs. Could that be due to the shorter barrel? Possibly. Again, it could also be because I could just clean the barrel. Or maybe we're getting a little bit of wind that far down and the 2.5s just aren't heavy enough at this point to maintain a straight trajectory. Either way, if you're out past 100 feet, you might want to go with a longer version of the SLR AK. We've returned from our long 100-foot journey to review our accuracy at the 100-foot mark. As you can see, the longest barreled version had a much easier time of staying on target. Yes, our spread increased, and again, that could be something as easy as cleaning the barrel or even upgrading to a tight bore barrel in the future if you find yourself doing a lot more long-range engagements. But all of my hits were on a body-sized target at 100 feet. I think that's a win. Thankfully, that red dot saved me with my mid-length. I was able to get a tighter spread than I was even with my longer barrel. I did have a few outliers though, so if we throw out the ones in the lower D section, I was still able to get the majority of my shots in the A and C ring, which for a mid-length system at 100 feet is really notable. And finally, our 100-foot test with our Shorty McShortboy. As you can see, ignoring completely my 50-foot test, only a couple of my shots were on target, with most of them flying wide or flying over the top. That probably could have been solved with a little bit finer tuning of my hop-up, definitely a cleaned barrel, and having more time behind the platform so that I could use the sights more effectively. But I'd say that you're reaching the upper limit of the intended distance that the shortest AK in the SLR lineup was intended to be used in. You could absolutely go with a tight bore barrel here, bring in that accuracy at longer distances if you're using this in a wide variety of engagements. But if you're shooting long distance, you might want to go with a longer barrel. Lining up for our chrono test, we've got our X-Cortec chronograph set up to accept .20s. I've got .20 gram BBs in our high cap magazine, and it's also worth noting that for the entire tests that we've been doing all day, we've been using the same 11.1 volt, 2600 milliamp Titan Power battery. Let's see how we do. As you can see, we've got a really respectable 390 FPS out of this short version. Let's see how we do on full auto. In addition to having just over 18 rounds per second due to that 11.1 and a very nice motor, we're also retaining our FPS at just about 390. So no noticeable drop in FPS while shooting it on full auto, which for a lot of airsofters shooting AKs, it's very important. We've moved up to our mid-length test for chrono. Again, 2.0s, 11.1. Aside from the accessories, this hasn't been modified in any way, so I'm excited to see what difference in performance we get out of the mid-length. Again, right on the money, 390 FPS gives you great performance outdoors. Let's see how it does on full auto. Interestingly, we had a little bit of a jump in FPS, but we're right at the just over 18 rounds per second on full auto. Respectable on both lengths. I want to see if there's any difference from the full length version. I've reset my X-Cortec chrono. Again, I've got 2.0s in it, 11.1, you guys know the drill. Let's hit it up on here and see how the full length version does. Despite the increased barrel length, the SLR series of AKs does a fantastic job of still keeping you under that 400 FPS mark, which means it's, widely compatible with the vast majority of fields that you're going to be visiting. I particularly like that this one is even more consistent than the other two, being within an FPS or two of each other between shots. Let's see how it does on full auto. And for some reason, we've jumped 1 round per second. So if you want the fastest, most hard shooting one in the group, the full length Longboy AK is the way to go. We've talked a lot about the accuracy of all 3 different lengths of the SLR AK series. And while that performance is notable, I feel like we've glossed over one of the most fun, interesting, and widest uses of an AK in airsoft. Let's use this bad boy for what it was intended, should we? Hip fired, no sights, drum mag. Just as Kalashnikov intended. You know, I gotta be honest, these are pretty freaking sweet. Are they an M4? Well, no, not really. But for a guy like me that's shot primarily M4s for the longest time, these AKs present me with a really attractive alternative to a pretty oversaturated standard M4 market. If you've ever considered running an AK but have been stopped by lack of features or a design that you really weren't crazy about, I think the SLR AKs are really where it's at. They've got a cool billet style receiver that brings them into the modern age with a ton of accessory mounting options and the availability to attach whatever stock you want. These not only look cool, but have the performance that you expect out of something at this price point, especially for a licensed product. I would argue that something like an SLR AK AEG would cause even the most staunch M4 user to drool just a little bit. If you're looking to upgrade your airsoft arsenal with an AK platform that you might not have otherwise considered, you definitely want to check out the Dytac SLR Sharpest Bros AK AEG series, available right here at Evike.com, where you can find all 3 lengths of the Dytac SLR Sharpest Bros AK AEGs in the series, as well as all of the accessories we've attached to this one, in addition to even more accessories to further personalize your brand new AK AEG. If you like what we're doing here on our YouTube channel, make sure you click that subscribe button as well as the bell notification icon to be notified of when we release our latest videos. And we're always doing exciting stuff on our Facebook and Instagram, so you don't want to miss that. Make sure you sign in and subscribe to those as well, because we're always doing giveaways and uploading awesome photos and stories like AMAs and stuff. You don't want to miss any of that stuff either. As always, make sure you're playing hard, playing safe, playing responsibly. See you guys later.